Hi, I have a project this summer, which is to read all of Brandon Sanderson's books. I have previously read the original Mistborn trilogy, so Era 1, and I have just finished Words of Radiance, so the first Stormlight Archive book. And my goal is to read all of Brandon Sanderson's books. So I have been doing a bit of research about the Cosmere. So I'm only starting with the Cosmere books because it's enough already as it is with only Cosmere books. And I am going to read them in kind of an unconventional order. Or not really, I guess. But I've been doing a lot of research, watching a lot of YouTube videos where people recommend reading orders and how you should read them in order to get the best experience. But I think I am going to stick to kind of the publication date order. So I'm going to try to read them as they were written and published. But obviously starting out, I have already failed doing it completely publication order. So I'm not going to stick to the publication dates completely. I'm just going to do however I feel like doing it, honestly. But I do have a few books that I know I have to read before I can read another one and stuff like that. Yeah, so like I said, I've read Mistborn, Era 1, and I've read The Way of Kings. And now I am just started out with WARBREAKER. I have only started with the prologue so far, but I thought that I would kind of just record my going along on this journey, mostly just for myself because this is a big project and I am gonna wanna remember it. So I think I'm just gonna do a bit of like vlogging kind of thing. So I'm gonna check in whenever there's something going on in the books. I guess I'll talk a little bit about the books that I have read and what I think about them. So I did love The Final Empire, the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, was a 5 out of 5. I read it last summer and one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. It was so good. I loved it. The heist, the infiltration, and the magic system and world building, everything was just amazing with it. I really enjoyed the second one, The Well of Ascension. I thought that was a really good one. I really liked the texts before each chapter. I was like really into it. I was writing it down and I was noting the differences in the texts. So I actually did figure out like the big twist at the end because I was so involved into it. And the third one I did enjoy as well. I thought it dragged on a little bit and I wasn't unhappy with the ending, but I thought it was kind of anticlimactic. I thought it would be a bigger thing than it was. It did also take me months to get through that one. So it could have been that I wasn't as into it because I took a big break between. Not hating on it, but it wasn't the best out of the three, I don't think. I just finished The Way of Kings and I thought that was really good. Obviously it's a slow burn, but I knew that going in. And even though it was a slow burn and even though it's just about some guy carrying bridges for 1,000 pages, I didn't find it boring. I was never bored reading it. And I actually read it in like 4 days, which is quite fast for me considering it's over 1,000 pages. And I really enjoyed it and the way it all came together in the end. I'm really excited to continue on that series. I know that's his masterpiece. That's what everyone's saying. And I know that Words of Radiance is considered probably his best book. But I am taking a break, so I'm reading WARBREAKER and I think I'm gonna read Elantris and also Alloy of Law so that I'm caught up in the publication date order. So yeah, follow along on this journey with me. We will see if I make it through to the end. Hopefully I do. Hopefully I do continue recording. I think this is going to be really fun. And as I said, I'm mostly just doing this for myself because it's going to take up so much of my time. But I'm also publishing it just if anyone's interested to see it. So yeah, I'll check in with you later on. Okay, so I am 120 pages into WARBREAKER, and so I thought I'd just have a first update. I'm really enjoying it so far. I think it's been set up into a really interesting story so far. I'm really excited to see where the God King thing goes. I was kind of thinking as soon as Ciri was forced to go marry him, I was like, maybe he's not what everyone says he is. I was kind of thinking he might be good. I don't think that as of right now because he's still been watching her kneel naked for 6 nights in a row. But obviously, something is different than the stories about him. And we learn that he doesn't really speak to anyone except for a chosen few, which I feel is quite important because that makes people think that he's a certain way when he might not actually be. So I'm really excited to see what his character actually is, if he is as evil and horrible as everyone says, or if there's actually something else going on behind closed doors. I like Ciri. She seems kind of a badass, like going against the tide with everything, not really having any patience and stuff. So, yeah, I think she's a good main character so far. I am really enjoying finding out about this magic system. It seems really cool. Right now, I'm still trying to figure it out. But if I know Brandon Sanderson, I know that he does take his time explaining this magic systems in his books so that eventually you do understand it. But at first, you kind of feel a bit overwhelmed with all the different terms and stuff. But yeah, it seems really cool. And I really like that the magic system is incorporated into the politics of the different cities, that the people from Idris think that the people in Halandrin, is that what it's called? They think that they are kind of sinning because they are taking other people's breaths. Because in Idris, they believe that you only have one breath and you shouldn't take anyone else's breath. And I find that interesting that it's incorporated into the politics. Okay, so we just found out the secret about the God King. Turns out they cut out his tongue and he's illiterate because he's actually just a puppet for someone powerful to do their bidding. So he's not necessarily evil or even powerful. He's just a puppet that someone is using to get their will through and to, I guess, essentially rule the kingdom. So that's an interesting twist. I knew something was off with the God King, that everything wasn't as it seemed. Didn't think that was going to be the thing, though. I feel kind of bad for him. He seems like a child almost. And also, he's kind of a prisoner. He has no way of communicating because he can't write, he can't talk. There's a horrible existence. And I was also thinking about the heir thing. The God King needs an heir. And I was wondering how they ensure that the heir is stillborn and then returned. And I was starting to think about, like, what do they do if it's not a stillborn child? Do they kill the baby? And how do they ensure that that baby is returned? And I feel like there's probably some big secret around that that's actually going to turn out that they do evil things in order to get an heir. Seems like that's going to be the case. As of right now, I am probably enjoying the Vivienne storyline the most because I'm really enjoying the merchants. I think that they are a nice bit of comic relief, and I'm really liking their kind of dynamic that's going on between Jewel and the two men and then Vivienne. And I'm also just enjoying the different experiences that Vivienne and Ciri are having when it comes to Hallandren. Because Ciri's like, oh, it's not as terrible as I was taught. While Vivienna's like, this is much worse than my tutor said. And I thought that was a bit funny. I don't really know what to think about Vashner yet. We haven't seen him that much, but we have heard him being talked about by Denth and Tonk Fa. And apparently Vashner killed the fourth member in their group, but he shouldn't have been able to just on skill, and they think that it's because of his new sword, which we know is called Nightblood. And we also know that Nightblood is talking to Vashner. I'm not really sure where his allegiances lie. Is he evil? Is he good? Is he somewhere in between? He seems to be a bit of a rebel, but I don't know if he's our kind of rebel or a bad kind of rebel. He did find secret tunnels underneath the gods' palaces. That's apparently something that the priests are hiding from their own gods, from the returned. When Lightsong was questioning the priests about it, he could tell that they were lying to him. So there's definitely something going on there. It was also really interesting because it was just a throwaway comment, but Vashner explained to his own blade that Nightblood can't tempt pure men. So that was an interesting, fast comment that he made that I feel are going to come back into play. There's something about the Nightblood that corrupts men, but it can only corrupt already corrupt men, I guess. So let's talk about Lightsong. Obviously, he is a returned. He is one of the newest ones. He's only 5 years old. He doesn't remember his life before he died. And so, therefore, we don't really know him that well. I'm still trying to kind of understand who he is and what his motivations are, because so far it seems like he's just lazy and he doesn't want to be involved in the politics of being a god. We had one scene where he was acting sick and he wanted to lie in bed all day, even though gods can't get sick, and he hates his daily chores. We do find out that his high priest, that he calls Scoot, I can't remember his actual name now, actually knew Lightsong before Lightsong died, which was a really interesting piece of information because that means that the high priest probably came with Lightsong to the palace when Lightsong returned because he knew him before he died. I was kind of thinking if Lightsong saved his high priest's life, and that's why the high priest dedicated his life to becoming the high priest of Lightsong. It's also interesting because Lightsong keeps having these dreams that are visions of his city being burnt down by flames. And he is kind of worried that if war comes to pass, that it will be Halandren who loses, not Idris. I also thought it was really interesting that the magic of being a returned is that every week they need someone to give them their breath in order to keep living. They are only supposed to live for a week and then die out unless they are given another breath. This is why Idris shames the returned, because they believe that taking someone else's breath is sinful and that you shouldn't take innocent breaths. But the interesting part about that is that Lightsong's high priest told him that he is supposed to give his breath to cure one person and then he will die. Every day he gets petitions from the people asking him to save them or their child or something. And he has to say no to every single person begging him for his breath. And they believe that he was returned for a purpose, that he saw something in the future that he needed to tell people, or for some purpose or other, he was returned. And when he has done the thing that he returned for, he will give his breath to one person and then die. That is kind of the belief system of the returned, which I feel is just bullshit. I feel like they've just made all of this up. And especially now, hearing more about the God King and the priests around the God King and how they are speaking in his name and claiming that he wants and thinks stuff that he has never wanted or thought, it kind of makes me feel like the priests have just made this entire religion up in order to gain power. It has been really interesting to read the chapters with the God King and Ciri because it is more and more obvious that the God King is so innocent in all of this and so naive. He doesn't know social cues. He hasn't been learned how to interact with people, obviously, because he has no tongue and he has just now learned how to write. So for the first time in his life, 50 years after he was born, he has finally learned how to communicate with someone. And that's just so crazy. but he does seem to be very naive and believe that the priests are doing what's best for him and his people. Ciri is saying that no, they might be taking advantage of you, but he believes that they are wholeheartedly good. He doesn't see that they are using his muteness as a way to gain power. His argument was that they had to cut out his tongue because he held too much power and he shouldn't be allowed to command and be an awakener because he has so many breaths, like thousands and thousands of breaths. But it's clear to Ciri that they also did it in order to manipulate him and be able to control him and then use his name in order to rule. There's also something going on in the castle. Bluefingers warned Ciri that not all is as it seems and that she should be careful and she might be in danger. So there's definitely something going on more than just the God King not being what he seems to be. So I guess that Ciri and the God King will continue trying to figure out what is going on in the castle. Why do they have tunnels underneath the castles? Really fucking sus, if you ask me. Also, really interesting questions that Ciri was asking about why do the God King need an heir now, after 50 years of ruling? Why do the priests want him to have an heir right now? The God King explained to us that his father died before he was even born. So do they want the God King to produce an heir because they are planning to kill the God King? Is that why? I don't know. But then again, why the fuck would they want him to produce an heir and then not tell him about sex? Like, he doesn't even know about sex. And Ciri's just there like, I am not the one who's going to tell you about this. That is for another day and for another person to have that conversation with you. I thought that was a quite funny reveal that he didn't even know how a child is produced. But it also does not make any sense why the priests would be so on top of Ciri having to produce an heir if they wouldn't even tell the God King how you make a child. I thought this discussion about religion was really interesting between Jules and Viviana. They are discussing the different religions that they believe in, and Jules is basically saying that Viviana is ignorant and rude about what she believes in and what she thinks that you should believe in. And I agree with it. You can implement that onto our religions that we have in the real world. Jules shook her head, turning away. That's why we get annoyed by you Idrians. So high, so certain that what you do is right. If your God asked you to give up your breath, or even the breath of your child, wouldn't you do it? You give up your children to become monks, forcing them into a life of servitude, don't you? That's seen as a sign of faith. Yet when we do something to serve our gods, you twist your lips at us and call us blasphemers. You don't have to believe in my miracles. You can call them accidents or coincidences, if you must. But don't pity me for my faith. And don't presume that you're better just because you believe something different. And I thought that was really nice. I liked that discussion. And I feel like Jules have a few good points about religion and to not judge other people for what they believe in. So Lightsong believes that he was an investigator or officer of the law of some kind because he has these skills that he doesn't know where he got them from. And he's realizing that a lot of the skills that he just happened to have is connected to investigating something or, a mystery. He's realizing that he's just innately interested in this death, and he's wondering why he is so interested in this death and why he wants to investigate it. So he's thinking he's some kind of law enforcer or something. But we also saw that he saw a prison of some kind in his mind. So I'm thinking he might be a criminal. Because if you think about it, a lot of the skill sets that an officer of the law would need, a criminal would also need. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking it might be a twist where he's actually a criminal. But I guess, I don't know if that's true. That's just a theory because he did die boldly. We still don't really know how he died, but I don't know. I was just thinking it might be some twist that he's not actually on the good side, but he was on the bad side. Who knows? Also, Hoyt is back. Love to see it. I love seeing Hoyt in all of these different stories and these different worlds. He's great. This time he came in the shape of a storyteller that told Ciri about the history of Hallandren and the God Kings and, you know, the many war. We got a lot of information, but I don't really know what to glean from it. I feel like we did not really get any proper answers, but I'm assuming it's setting up more information to come. So we did learn that Ciri's family is a descendant from the first returned, and that's why they have the claim to the throne, because they are the direct descendants from the first ever returned. And since returned are the gods in Hallandren, that's why Ciri's family is a threat. We also learned that god kings tend to die right or soon after they have produced an heir, which seems sus. And Ciri also noticed that, like, why is that? What's going on there? Ciri doesn't really believe that they just happen to die right after they've produced an heir. So there's definitely something going on there. I don't really know what. But yeah, it was interesting hearing about the many war and hearing a little bit more about the history, even though I don't really know what information I need to remember from that whole sequence. Okay, what the fuck? You're telling me that Denth is actually evil? I was just saying how that was my favorite storyline because I like the mercenaries so much. Did not see that twist coming. I really like them as characters. It makes so much sense though. Like, Vivienna's thinking back on everything that they said and did. It makes so much sense that they were actually doing it for their own gain, not for her or her cause. But now that I think about it, Vivienna did notice several times that Denth was like wearing a mask, that he was someone else underneath. But I just assumed that was because he had more to him, more than his humorous persona. I mean, like, he didn't want to show his trauma or something. He was actually a deeper person than he pretended to be. But actually, when she noticed that other person behind the mask, it was just his true self and his true intentions. And so even though I'm like shocked because I did not see it coming at all, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense a little bit, because I was thinking about having Vasher as a POV, but he was supposed to be like the ultra bad guy. And that didn't really make sense to me why we would follow him if he was just like super evil. So now that Denth and Tong Fa is actually the bad guys, maybe Vasher is maybe not necessarily good, but not at least evil. Like morally gray maybe? Yeah, this has taken me for a loop. What the fuck? I really liked Tong Fa and Denth. And like the animals that kept disappearing, Tong Fa kept losing his animals. That was because he was torturing them in the basement? Like, what the fuck? That is psycho behavior. What the fuck? I am shooked. That sucked. I feel like Vivienna, so disappointed and so shocked. And I thought they were my friends. Okay, yeah, I guess my favorite storyline is over now because the people I liked the most were actually evil. I'm really liking the stark differences between Vivienna and Ciri's storyline right now. We're reading one chapter completely about how Vivienna is not getting any food. She's literally sleeping on the streets and begging for a coin in order to feed herself. That chapter ends with her literally falling asleep on the street. And the next chapter is Ciri being like, Ciri was enjoying a meal in the garden. And like her just trying out so many different types of food and like being lavishly surrounded by food. It's just an interesting difference right now between where the princesses are. And I just like that it goes straight from Vivienna starving to Ciri just eating all different kinds of food and just enjoying herself. Okay, so basically Denth was hired by someone to actively try to start the war between Idris and Hallandren, and he's been using Viviana as a pawn, and she has unintentionally been going along with it and actively doing stuff to rile people up in order for the war to start. And Vasher told her that he thought she did it on purpose because no one could possibly be so stupid as to not realize what was actually happening. And it's been a theme throughout the entire book, how little Viviana actually knows, despite the fact that she was tutored her entire life to learn these things. But she's now realizing how little she actually knows about the real world. She thought she was so prepared for all of these things because she had the fanciest tutors and she's a princess and she grew up wealthy and with all of the grounds to be able to deal with politics in the world. But once she's actually faced with these problems and these situations, she actually doesn't understand anything. She realizes that she's been living so sheltered despite the fact that she was always supposed to go to Hallandren and marry the God King. And I just find it very interesting because it's obvious now that she's thinking about the entire interactions with Dent that it was manipulation and it went completely over her head. And because of her narration and because we saw it from her point of view, it also went over my head. Like, I didn't see this twist coming at all. And I guess it was because we saw it from Viviana's perspective and she was trusting them. So we were kind of made to believe in them too. And so I didn't even for a second question her judgment, even though the entire book has been about how her judgment has been wrong about everything else. It's just very well written, I think, the way that twist came about and how obvious it is now looking back on it in hindsight for both Viviana and for me as the reader. But while I was reading it, I was not suspecting anything. And maybe that's because I wanted to like them, but I think that's the point. They were using humor and being funny and nice and, and that kind of made us want to trust them. So I didn't even watch for a possible twist because I liked the characters so much. I didn't want them to be evil. And I'm guessing that's the point. That's how Viviana felt as well. So yeah. Okay, so update on the king and the heir and everything about that. They asked the question that I was wondering, which is how do they ensure that the heir is stillborn and then returned? The answer is they don't. The working theory of series right now is that they actually just find a stillborn who is returned, then make the queen have a kid, and then replace the returned child with the queen's actual child and swap them so that the God King is always a returned stillborn. And that's why they're pressuring Ciri to have a kid right now, because they have presumably already found the new God King. There was a stillborn who was returned. So it's not as sinister as I thought it would be, which I appreciate. It would have been bad if they would start killing babies. Not as bad as I thought, but still, I knew something was weird with the stillborn and returned thing. There couldn't possibly just be that the God King every time got a stillborn son who was returned. That's just unbelievable. I also had another passage that I really liked with Viviana, and she's just reflecting upon her religion and how maybe wrong she's been about certain things when it comes to her religion, and I just found it really nice, so I'm gonna read it. She did believe in Oster. She loved the teachings of the 5 visions: humility, sacrifice, seeing another's problems before your own. Yet she was beginning to think that she, along with many others, had taken this belief too far, letting her desire to seem humble become a form of pride itself. She now saw that when her faith had become about clothing instead of people, it had taken a wrong turn. And I just found that interesting, like being able to reflect upon your own beliefs and your own faith and seeing where you went wrong and just having that analyzed. Really nice. Another thing I was thinking about really fast was, does Vasher know Claude from before Claude was lifeless? Because they're talking about breath and awakening and stuff. And Viviana mentions how Denth has a lifeless. And Vasher's like, yeah, I know. And it's described that he has a frown and there was something in his eyes. And I was like, did he know Claude before Claude died? Is that why he's frowning? Because they made a lifeless of someone that they actually used to know? I don't know, just theories, but it was definitely something there. Something going on with Vasher and Claude, so we'll see. Okay, what the fuck? Vasher and Denth was in the many war? That means they are thousands or at least hundreds of years old. Because Vasher also said something about how he hadn't dealt with Returned for a very long time, and that Returned brought back old memories or something like that. So are they returned? Are they really, really old returned? Or what's going on here? Very eventful few pages here. Lightsong was a scribe, so he was not a criminal and he was not a detective. He was just a scribe for a local money lender. And I just find it hilarious that Larimar finally broke. He just went all out and started yelling at Lightsong for being so stupid and not thinking about the consequences of his actions. But I didn't really even get to enjoy that part because right after that, Blushweather was killed. They literally slit her throat. That was crazy. What the fuck? Yeah, a lot of revelations, a lot of things happening. I am kind of scared that we won't get all of the answers that I want, but this is supposed to be a standalone, so I hope that we do. I guess we'll find out. Okay, so Larimar is Lightsong's brother, and Lightsong died saving his niece. That is why Larimar went with him. He was already a priest before, and Lightsong returning kind of restored his faith in the iridescent tones. Also, Bluefingers was bad. I mean, it's not as shocking as it was with Denth betraying us, but still didn't expect it, but it's not as shocking. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Okay, so this entire thing has been a plot for the Pawn Call people to get their revenge and freedom from the people of both Hallandren and Idris. And Bluefingers seems to be at the front of this because he is Pawn Call and has a really high position within the castle. And now that I think about it, I do remember Pawn Call being mentioned a lot, the people, but we didn't really get that much information about it. And I guess that was a little bit suspect because usually Brandon Sanderson is very thorough. And I guess he on purpose didn't tell us that much about it so that this twist would come. But yeah, it's just an interesting aspect because it was really binary for most of the book. It was like Idris versus Hallandren. And now this third people are coming into the mix and are, I guess, beneath both of them and wants revenge from both of Idris and Hallandren. Okay, I gotta admit, Vasher's way of killing Denth, so fucking clever. He's like, no one would ever be stupid enough to give someone their breath and then kill them because it's worth so much. And that big surprise of getting breath like that is exactly what he needs in order to kill him. And that's how he killed our Steele as well. Very clever, love to see it. But I am still so confused about who they are. Who is Denth? Who is Vasher? They have lived since the Many War. Vasher had a hand in discovering the lifeless command that only takes one breath. I'm very confused who they are. And now, as Denth was dying, his hair changed color. And we've established that the royal line has that mimic. It's the people with royal blood who can change the color of their hair. Are Denth and Vasher the First returned. I'm so confused. I don't know who they are. They have lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. And now this comes along where his hair changes color, which has been a really prevalent thing throughout the book, that it's only royal blood that can do that. So are they first returned? What's going on? So am I understanding it correctly that Light Song's visions were all for him to realize that he needed to give his breaths to the God King? Because he's like remembering his death, and he remembered seeing all of these visions that he has been dreaming about, and he's realizing that the things that he dreamt and the visions that he had were all in that room at that time, and it kind of told him what to do to give the breaths to Cesebron in order for him to be able to obviously rescue Ciri and stuff. And if that interpretation is correct, that means that Lorimer's explanation of the religion was correct, that the returned do come back for a purpose, and that they believe that the visions have a purpose and a meaning to them, and that the returned will give away their breath after they have fulfilled the purpose that they returned for. And obviously, Light Song's purpose was to give his breath to the God King in order to save everyone from this war happening. Because he's kind of realizing right at the end, I don't know if he's dead yet, but I'm assuming he is. He's realizing right before he gives away his breaths that he is a god, because he's been questioning this the entire time, whether or not he is a god, and thinking that the religion is really stupid, but remembering actively choosing to return. He says he remembers a voice telling him he could return, and he remembers actively returning, kind of realizing I am a god and I can do something about this. I feel like the entire book has very much wanted us as the reader to believe that Hallandren's religion is kind of bullshit. They wanted us to think that the priests were corrupt, which it turns out they weren't at all. It was actually Pan Call, or what the people are called, that were corrupt, not the God King's priests. Obviously, seeing from Light Song's perspective, thinking that everything is pretty much bullshit, and that him thinking that he was a fraud, essentially. I feel like throughout the entire book, we were supposed to assume that this religion was actually kind of non-existent, or like it wasn't true. And now, right at the end of the book, I feel like it's confirming that no, these beliefs are actually true, and this religion isn't all just bullshit and corrupt. And that's nice. I like that. Finally, we get the reunion of the sisters, both of them not really recognizing each other because they've both been through so much, and they've changed so much since the book started. Quite nice, even though we haven't actually seen them at all together. It was just nice to have that little reunion in the middle of them trying to figure out how to stop this lifeless army. Also, we did briefly find out that Vasher was one of the 5 scholars, which, if I remember correctly, are the people that Idris' religion is based on. It's based on the 5 scholars. So, yeah, I knew they were definitely important, Vasher and Denth. I'm still wondering about Denth's changing of the hair. I don't know if that will come back or if that was just like a misdirect or something. We'll see. Okay, I have finished the book. We did get most of the answers that I wanted. I am happy with the ending all in all. There are a few things about the magic and stuff that we didn't really get answers to, but I am fine with it because I believe that we don't really need it in order for it to be a satisfying ending. We did find out that Vasher was Khaled and the Peacegiver. He said something about how history couldn't accept that he changed his mind, and so they had to make him 2 different people instead of someone who started the war and then ended up ending the war because he changed his mind. I liked that detail. I thought that was good. Also a bit funny that at the end he says that his first name as a returned was Warbreaker, the Peaceful, hence the name of the book. And he said that he didn't know if he ended up being the one to end the war because that name was a prophecy or because he wanted to live up to that name. And I guess it really doesn't matter. But I just thought it was fun that they finally actually said the name of the title of the book. And as I said, we don't really get a definite answer on how Returned works. The epilogue is very much saying that we don't know everything, like Vasher said in the beginning when he was teaching Viviana about it. We don't know everything, we don't know how it works. And I know that Brandon Sanderson has said that he will write another book in this world again. It's not a priority, but he is planning to write a sequel. And I'm assuming that he will delve further into the history of Returned in upcoming books in this world, which will be interesting to read. Also, I'm pretty sure that Denth changing the color of his hair was just supposed to be a hint that he was returned, not necessarily that he was the ancestor of the royal line. Another thing that I might have been wrong about was the whole thing with Vasher reacting to Viviana mentioning Claude, the lifeless that Jules had. I said that Vasher had a look about him, and I theorized that he might have known Claude when he was alive. But I'm guessing that maybe that was just Vasher disapproving of lifeless as a concept. But that also makes me think about how Viviana noticed something in Claude. When Claude defended Viviana, she saw a determination in his face, and she described it as almost a human emotion, which can't be because lifeless don't have emotions. And I feel like that was mentioned at least once, maybe twice, and that never came back into play, what that meant. So I'm guessing that's also open for a future book to reveal something about the lifeless. Are they really as emotionless as they believe? Stuff like that. And I guess another thing that was answered as well, I mentioned it as a bit before, but the fact that the God King's priests were actually not bad. They knew that Ciri couldn't get pregnant because Returned can't have children, and the God King is no exception to that. They also didn't actually know how the first Returned created the first God King. That was a mystery even to them. But yeah, so they weren't gonna switch the babies like Ciri first thought that they would. They were just going to pretend that Ciri was pregnant and then have the returned baby be the baby that Ciri birthed. But what I don't understand about that is why they were so adamant about Ciri doing her duty and like listening in to make sure she was actually having sex with the God King if they knew that she could never get pregnant anyways. Why couldn't they just pretend after a certain amount of time that she was pregnant without forcing her to have sex with the God King? The only thing I can think of why they would do that is because they were worried about spies within the castle, that they needed her to actually perform the sexual act in case spies found out that she wasn't doing it. And within the revelation that the priests weren't actually bad, we also found out that they weren't actually planning on killing the God King soon after the heir arrived. I guess previous God Kings have really just given up their breath after their heir came about because they felt like their purpose had ended. But the priests fully intended to let the God King live out his days. And since we found out from Lightsong that at least somewhat of the whole purpose thing within the religion is true, maybe that was just what happened with the other God Kings, that they felt their purpose was fulfilled when they had an heir, and that's why they gave away their breath soon after. Nothing more mysterious or corrupt than that, I guess. But yeah, I do feel like I got all of the important questions answered. The only ones that weren't fully answered are just the history of the world and the magic system and how it works. And I feel like I'm fine with not getting all of the precise answers to those because it really sets up for future books to explain further into detail about those kinds of things. So I'm fine with that. Generally, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good. I liked the main characters. There were twists I didn't see coming. The magic system was so interesting. Probably my favorite out of the 3 different magic systems I have read by Brandon Sanderson. And just, yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 out of 5, which is obviously quite good. Now I am going to start reading Elantris, and so we'll see how that goes. I'm gonna end this video here. I was planning on having multiple books within one video, but this video is already long enough and I didn't expect that, so I'm ending it here, and I'm probably going to do 1 book per video just to make it easy. So yeah, thank you so much if you watched all the way through the end. I will get back when I have read Elantris. Bye!